welcome to our Learning Community Talk with Landon Mascareñaz, the Vice President of Community Partnership at the Colorado Education Initiative, and also the co-founder of the Open Systems Institute. You may have caught our talk with Landon earlier this summer, where we touched upon kind of the genesis of the Open Systems Institute and the theory and thought behind it. And today, what we thought we would do is give Landon the floor to talk about our role, each of our roles as leaders in system opening, and how it is necessary for us to be those leaders, to really drive the kind of change that we want to see happen in education and across, our polity, really. Just by way, a little bit more way of introduction. Again, you may have heard me note this on our previous talk with Landon. We here at Seek Common Ground owe so much to Landon as a thought partner for how we've begun our work. We've taken a lot of inspiration from the open systems idea and from Landon's fierce advocacy for family and community engagement as a foundational principle of the public education. And we're just always happy to have him share his wisdom with us. And so we'll turn it over to Landon in just a minute. I do want to note we're recording, as we do, the first half hour of today's talk so that people can access this asynchronously on Slack and on our YouTube channel. And then we'll transition to overtime for the second half hour. And we'll bring up participants as panelists because we're doing the webinar function. So we'll bring you up and have an informal discussion that will be off the record and unrecorded. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Landon and enjoy.
Thank you, Michael. As always, you're too generous. The learning always goes both ways. I can't imagine the Open Systems Institute and so much of the stuff that I've learned along my journey without you and Claudia and the whole Seek Common Ground team supporting a lot of that journey along the way. So I'm coming to you all live from Castle Rock, Colorado, with Starbucks here. So I apologize for the background noise. I'm about to facilitate a really exciting session with Colorado Springs school districts on the topic of belonging and openness. So I'm very excited about that. And so I'm a little in transit. But I'm excited to have this conversation with you today because one of the things that we talked about in our last conversation was getting through the concept of openness and what does openness really mean? How are we building it in our systems and structures? And what I'm here to do today is to share a little bit around what comes next when we think about our personal leadership capacity to build openness. And so we're really going to talk about what it means to be an open leader and facilitating open systems change and what it requires from you yourself as one of those open leaders. This is a quote from Sojourner Truth, and I think about this a lot when I think about the work of open leaders who are in tough, challenging, complex systems all over the country and are moving in topics of spaces of liberation and openness and co-creation and co-production and co-production. And that's you all in Seek Common Ground, part of this network, part of some really exciting work happening around the country. When we brought the first open system convening together back in December of 2019, we started to generate and co-create a set of guiding principles for what it means to do open systems work, to move away from the walls and fortresses that prevent our families and communities from partnering and co-creating to an open realm. And one of the things we talked a lot about is the leadership capacity to do that. And so amongst all these principles, the leadership capacity is what we're going to be digging into today. So I want to take some moment to do a first reflection, and you can just put your thoughts in the chat. Why do some leaders thrive in co-creation with their community and others scorn it or resist it or fear it? Why do some leaders thrive on it and others scorn or resist it? Just take a second to reflect on this question and put it in the chat. I love that, Helena. Some have a more competitive mindset. Cooperation versus competition. There's something real there. It's a mindset. Sometimes it's a value question. Sometimes it's a skill question. Claudia, I love that. Around the risk. Co-creation can seem very risky. There's a lot of fear of opening up that space with community members. We're going to keep moving. But I think the reality is when we talk about co-creation and co-production, we talked about this in our first session. We talked about Professor Mark Bohr's strategic triangle. And I know at Common Ground, they're a big fan of triangles and lots of things. So we're going to have our strategic triangle here for public sector change. You have to articulate a public value. You have to build legitimacy and support with people in your authorizing environment. And you have to build corresponding capacity. And the part of the work of the leader is to round that triangle all the time. It's the same in education, housing, healthcare, whatever it's a public system. It's about articulating that public value proposition and working to build legitimacy and support. And one of the things that I often use as an example was my mom was supposed to start a STEM school. But then she met with her broader community and co-created the idea of it being a STEAM school to make sure it included arts, which meant she had a different type of operational capacity, which meant that as she was rounding the triangle, she was thinking differently about not only the co-creation with her community, but the long-term co-production, how her community was going to be involved into building that capacity. And when we think about why we do open systems work versus closed systems, why we try to avoid closed systems, in education, in so many public sector endeavors, there's a lot of closed systems work. There's an articulation of a public value, then we build capacity, and we don't really bother with building legitimacy and support with it, with our broader authorizing. We ignore the voices of our community, or if we do, we just are coming to them to tell them about the thing we've already built. Versus in an open system, when you actually round that triangle and build that capacity, you have the opportunity to build trust in the long term and re-inspire confidence in public sector institutions. And I don't think it's a too far step to say that we have a crisis of legitimacy in our public sector institutions. But what does it mean to be a leader? To actually have the capacity to co-create and co-produce. In my experience working with leaders across the entire country, some of them on this call, folks who are leading school systems, who are community organizers, who are on the ground, inside and outside the system, they all have this ability to channel their purpose, passion, and place together to spin this wheel, to allow them the creative, inspirational, emotional, and connective energy to move across communities and build capacity and re-articulate public value, to be able to build that flywheel effect across this entire system. Because it's complicated work. Some people fear it. Some people are scared of it. Some people are worried about its potential for what it means for them, their ability, and moving beyond. So what does it mean to channel your purpose, passion, and place together? So how we think about purpose, passion, and place is a question that I'm asking you here today. Not only our participants on the call, but also the Seek Common Ground team. What is your purpose, passion, and place? Are you in flow as you're building co-creative and co-production cycles? And where are you being blocked? Is your wheel spinning? That's the question we're going to be asking today. So let's start with purpose. When I was in graduate school, I had the incredible pleasure of working with Marshall Gans, who built the Self Us Now framework. And Marshall asked us to think about what we're called to do in our life. Not just the job that we have, not just the project that we're working on, but what is the arc of change that we're called to build in the course of our lifetime? And Marshall often quotes Rabbi Hillel, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me?" What are the important choices you've made in your life to get you to the spot where you value co-creation? What are the through lines that have led you to believe that we have to seek a new way of building public systems through open? And how are you actualizing that in your current, past, and potentially future roles? So I'd like you to take a minute on a piece of note paper, just jot down some of the questions, reflections of those thoughts, or if you have a reflection or thought on it, feel free to also put it in the chat. Take about 2 minutes, 3 minutes to think about it. Okay, we're going to keep moving to passion. So when I often talk about this, people say, what's in between passion and purpose? Purpose is that directional force in your life, that thing that you know that you have to do, that actually is the focus to make sure that when you're in the space that you're in, that you know you're heading in the right direction. Passion is the flow, the energy that courses through you when you're working on what you're doing. And openers need that passion. I am often reminded of the Stoic maxim, amor fati, love of fate, not to resist what life gives us, but to love it. And to be in a space of co-creation and co-production with diverse stakeholders from all different types of backgrounds, all different types of classes, race, and genders, you have to love the difference of energy. You have to love all the randomness that life brings you. And openers, in my experience, people who are really adept at leading co-creative work, do not despair at these ever-changing dynamic environments and ever-new flowing of policy opportunities, but they find that amor fati. It's the passion that flows them through and making sure that what they're doing is the space that they know that they're supposed to be in. So, what aspects of your current life and work give you that flow of energy? Where do you currently get depleted or exhausted from opening up systems, from co-creating technologies? And does your passion live in another place or purpose? What could that be? Thinking about alternatives. Take a few minutes to write down your reflections. Great. Okay, now let's move to the last one. Place. Community-driven work requires a community. The reality is that you cannot be fully committed to co-creative work, co-production work, or the work of redesigning public systems unless you are anchored in a place. And in my experience, that could be lots of different ways to be anchored. Some people say, well, the only people who should do co-creation and co-production work are people who have actually lived in that community. They should be from that community. In my experience, there are lots of people who are new to communities, who are really adept at honoring and valuing communities that they're part of. And in my experience, there's a few things that really tell us about people's ability to really be anchored in the ability to lead co-creation work and co-production work in their life. Are they curious? Are they grounded? And are they admiring? So, what are you continually curious about? Whether you've been there for years or you're brand new to the place where you work, what is the thing that makes you curious about your community's potential? What keeps you grounded in your place or in your role? What is the truth about your community? What is the real tough conversations in the community keep you grounded in this potential for change that make you want to go and fight every day for the opportunity to reimagine and design public systems? And then what are the things you really admire about community? admiring something doesn't mean you just look at it with rainbow colored glasses or rose colored glasses and say, oh, it's just perfect. But you see something in it that has the potential or already has assets within it that you want to draw out and let it merge in more full form through public sector institutions, through that co-creation, through that co-production. Take a few minutes to reflect on your place. Just take another minute to think about these three questions. Okay, so does your wheel spin? Is your purpose, passion, and place in flow? Is that energy and connection going? Are you clear about your purpose? Are you feeling passion when you do the co-creation work? And are you doing it in a place that you're curious, grounded, and admiring of? Are you seeing those connections? Are you seeing that flow? Are you seeing that electricity light? Does your wheel spin? So with that, I'd love to check in with Tom and Michael and see if there's an opportunity for us to let folks weigh in or open up into the conversation, or should we just do the chat?
Sorry, coming back on screen. Let's go through this exercise right now on the chat, if we could. And Helena, I see your message. Helena, sorry, I see your message. Yes, we'll ask Landon for this information. What we might do, Landon, is we could go through this dialogue, and
let's do it. Michael, what about you? Is your wheel spinning?
Oh, you always
man.
Get my wheels spinning, Landon. You know it. And I'll just note for other folks, Landon and I have had a little bit of a preview discussion around this, and one of the breakthroughs, I think, for me in this consideration was your community and your place can be expansive. It can be national, it can be regional. It can also be very specific. And what at
it can be a village in a neighborhood, or it can be a region.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that what we've had the tremendous honor at Seek Common Ground to witness is how people have embraced their place, from neighborhoods, from supporting work in neighborhoods, from activating work in neighborhoods, to really having a national imprint. So I think for me, I'll just note myself like that, although I'm no longer a person of faith, so much of what my grounding is in the faith world, and the inspiration for the common good. So as I reflect on that, that is a driver for me, and that's a connection that is in my bloodstream, and my desire is to be as expansive as possible in determining how to reflect that in place. So I just note that, but your inspiration could be your neighborhood.
Right. But let's dig in on you though for just a second, Michael. What I heard you talk about is your purpose for building the common good and building commons and space where people can connect. And, you know, as long as I've known you, you know, while you lived in North Carolina, like you've really seen your place as in the national conversation. Like you're really anchored in the civic combo of America. Like that's what gives you a lot of energy. And I have seen you have a lot of passion when you're facilitating, connecting, and bringing people together on those two topics. Is that right? Is that how your wheel? Is that your wheel spinning? Is that how you get the energy?
That spins the wheels, my brother. Yes, absolutely. And what I try to do in considering the opening of systems is that through line from being at a local school board meeting to, you know, affecting national policy. And I really deeply believe that there is a through line, that those elements have connection across space, and that there's really shared learnings and shared responsibilities across all of those spaces.
It's for me, you know, and I think about my purpose, which is really a lot about thinking about opening systems and the passion I have for working, facilitating communities of diverse backgrounds. And the place for me, you know, while I live in Denver, my place is the Rocky Mountain West. That's for me, it's New Mexico, it's Colorado. Sometimes that spreads a little bit east and west, north and south, into even Mexico and even north. I'm very intrigued by that. When I go to California to see my family, I'm like, this is beautiful, but I don't feel it as my place. I'm not curious about it. I don't admire it. I don't feel grounded in California. When I go to New York, I'm like, man, all the food you could ever want in the world. It's amazing, it's beautiful, but I'm not very curious about it. I don't really admire it. I think it's different, but when I'm in a small village in rural New Mexico, or I'm in Colorado Springs, I'm interested in what's going on here. And that grounds me in leading co-creative work or supporting leaders doing co-creative work in those places.
So I'll just note when we move to overtime, I'd love to bring some people up and continue this part of the discussion, and that reflection on like what is your passion, how do you position yourself in this space, because I think we're all drawn to the work, as you've pointed out, Landon, we're all drawn to the work because it is what motivates us. It's not the profit motive, it's profiting our fellow beings. Before we transition, I have to ask the question, Landon, that we ask of everyone is just, could you reflect on someone who's inspired you, maybe someone who's inspired you to pursue the open system?
I love that question. There's so many people that have inspired me to do the open system work and continually inspire me as I go along this journey. And like the thing that comes to my mind when I think about this question now in this moment is thinking about some of the schools and districts I work in and who are in rural and conservative contexts. In particular, a leader I'm working with right now in a very conservative context who has led some really inspiring co-creation work. There's been enormous community blowback, but they're not leaning away from democracy building and co-creation, which really co-creation is democracy. So in some ways, we should just call it democracy. It's building small d democratic capacity systems. This leader is not running away from it. He's actually in another context, Shia, like a few people right now who are in places like this, whether small towns or big cities, they're actually leaning more into conversation. They're leaning more into discussion, deliberation with families and communities. And I think I'm really worried about in our country right now is that the establishment's instinct when people are saying, let's not have these hard conversations, or that is to run away from them, and instead we should
Thank you for that, Landon. And thank you for sharing the evolution of your thinking around the open system. We'll now transition to overtime. Thank you for those of you who joined us live, and for those of you who are accessing the recording. Hope you appreciate it. Please send us your ideas for future talks. We take that seriously. We try to always accommodate you on what you need to do your work. And for some of you, we'll see you in a couple hours with our workshop on developing your message. And look to Slack for upcoming programming. We're going to have a few more events before we close out 2021. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll head over to overtime.